from my garden in Selsey. Well, autumn is upon us. The nights are getting longer. Believe me, there's plenty to see. So we're now going to look at the stars of autumn. Well, I've got my own observatory, of course, but other observers have come there and brought their own telescopes. And earlier on, Chris joined them as they were setting up.
There'll be plenty to see this evening. I'm looking forward to the Andromeda Galaxy, to catching the International Space Station as it passes by, and even looking at the moon later on when it rises. We've got dozens of telescopes, loads of astronomers, and all we need now is the sky to stay clear.
I'm going to try and photograph that then.
So what are you hoping to see tonight?
Mainly the moon.
Okay.
And anything else we can find up there, really.
We're sort of in between, aren't we, here, with the winter skies coming around in the early morning, and then we've got the summer triangle disappearing. So there's all sorts of different things that I'm hoping to look at. So clusters are right up there on my list.
Yeah, it's just there. I see it. Yeah.
What's this doing up here? Why is this wired in?
That's a dew shield.
Ah, okay.
And it's just got a little heater on in case it gets a little bit too dewy. It
Okay.
gets rid of all the moisture so the lens doesn't dew up.
I think that's most ingenious.
It is. Perfect educational tool.
Very good.
We came over from Dublin, and we're basically going to be planning on doing just some visual observations tonight. The moon, Uranus, and some deep sky objects as well.
We've got a really good placed last quarter moon tonight, so that's going to be my main focus. Hopefully I'm going to be able to get some really nice mosaics of some of the craters.
So Bruce, what's the plan for this evening?
Well, I'm going to be looking at the moon tonight, Chris.
Your specialist subject? Are
Yeah,
you
it is.
looking or imaging as well?
I'm going to be imaging, taking advantage of the good libration, and hopefully get some images of the South Pole.
So what's libration?
Well, it's the sort of wobble effect of the moon, where the moon, as we see it, we get to see about 59% of the moon, and we get this opportunity every so often to see parts that we don't normally see through the year.
And tonight it's looking at the craters around the South Pole.
I'm going to be focusing on that specifically, yeah.
So this is a lovely little new-looking telescope. What's the plan for it this evening?
Well, as you say, it's little, so it doesn't have great light-gathering facilities. So planets are excellent. Jupiter should be good tonight. And then later on, just the moon.
And we've got a pass of the International Space Station this evening as well, and something special next to it as well.
That's right, there's the Jules Verne ATV, Automated Transfer
This is the
Vehicle.
European, or part of the European contribution.
It's going to have a fantastic end in a few days' time, because they're actually going to re-enter it and it's going to burn up over the Pacific.
It's a big vehicle.
It's about 22 tonnes, isn't it? Something like that, which is huge.
But tonight, no re-entry, just flying in formation.
It's going to be really tight as well, because as it appears in the southwest, we're only going to get about 30 seconds of the Jules Verne craft before it enters the Earth's shadow.
Well, it's a nice dark evening now. I ordered it specially, of course. And I'm joined now by one of our great friends, Dr. John Mason. Welcome back, John.
Nice to be here, Patrick.
Well,
and in
the
your
autumn
garden.
sky, there's plenty to see. Where should we start?
Well, I suppose we'll start where most beginners start, and that is with the Plough or Big Dipper.
In the north?
Yeah, rather low down in the north at this time of year, of course, so not quite as obvious, perhaps.
Look at the 2 pointers. DP, definitely yellow, Mera, pure white. Different colours.
But if you start with the Plough, obviously with the bowl, the familiar saucepan shape with the handle to the left, and if you take the 2 stars at the right, Merak and Dupe, the pointers, and you go up and to the right, you of course come to the pole star, Polaris in Ursa Minor. Now, of course, if you continue that line from the pointers, Merak and Dupe, up through Polaris, and keep on going, you come to the W of Cassiopeia.
Or the M, if you like.
Well, this time of year, it really is like a W that's been sat on, a bit of a squash W. And, you know, when the Plough is low down, Cassiopeia is always high up. And Cassiopeia is probably the main and most distinctive marker at this time of year, high up in the eastern sky.
And 2 very interesting stars there. The middle star of the W, Gamma Cassiopeia, is definitely variable. It can be blazes at the magnitude 1.5 sometimes.
And of course, yes, back in 1936, that was when it was particularly bright.
Of course, beta definitely doesn't vary.
No, that's right. That's the top right of the W. Now, while we're on the subject of beta,
yes.
if you come just to the right of beta, in a pair of binoculars, there's a line of 3 stars, Tor, Rho, and Sigma. Now, the middle one, Rho, is a very interesting star.
Hypergiant.
That's right, a yellow hypergiant, 10,000 light years distant, a very remote star, very luminous, a star that's almost certain to go supernova.
It will.
Indeed, there are people who believe it's already gone supernova and the light from the explosion is travelling towards us, but we haven't yet seen it.
May well be. When it does go, it's going to be a real sight.
It certainly is.
Then, of course, now, Cassiopeia, Miss her husband, Cepheus.
There is. And of course, the Milky Way flows more or less overhead and down past Cepheus and through Cassiopeia. And there are lots of nice, rich, open star clusters along that band of the Milky Way. There's that nice one in Cepheus, of course, NGC 188, which I think is the first entry in your Caldwell catalogue, isn't it?
Caldwell 1, yes.
And I believe it's one of the, not only one of the oldest open star clusters, in excess of 5 billion years old, but I believe it's probably the closest open cluster to the North Celestial Pole. Not far from Polaris,
It's certainly very, very close.
And then we come into Cassiopeia. Now, there's 3 open clusters in Cassiopeia I want to mention. They're all quite close to the star Urukbar, which is Delta Cas, which is the lower one of the left-hand V of the W. Yes. Now, if you come to the left of that, there's 2 clusters there. NGC 663, which is a nice cluster,
yes.
80 stars, quite nice in binoculars and a low power. And then between that and Urukbar, you've got M103. Now, that's not so prominent, sort of a triangular fan shape of stars. And of course, if you then come below and to the left of Cassiopeia, following the Milky Way down, we come to the wonderful Sword Handle.
The double cluster in Perseus. It's a marvellous sight. You can see it with the naked eye, but we're not going to show it beautifully. 2 clusters next to each other, very similar to each other, nothing quite like it in the sky.
No, and of course it's between the top of Perseus and Epsilon Cas, which is the left-hand star of the W, and as you say, lovely in binoculars, beautiful in a low-power telescope, and of course if you use the right power and a wide field, you can get the 2 clusters sitting there very nicely side by side. One of them, of course, rather brighter and more concentrated, the other rather more scattered and irregular, but a really lovely sight.
And very easy to photograph too.
Indeed. Now, of course, I suppose one of the most intriguing objects in Perseus is the Demon Star.
Algol, the Demon Star, usually just below the 2nd magnitude, and then it periodically fades down. You can almost see it going down.
It winks every 2.87 days, and that's because it, of course, is not 1 star varying, it's actually 2 stars. And I've got those 2 stars in my hand here. There's a yellow giant star, which is quite dim, and a smaller blue main sequence star, which is quite bright. Now, when you see the 2 side by side like that, then, of course, it's the normal brightness. When the blue one goes in front of the yellow one, there's a tiny dip in brightness, but not very much. But it's when the blue one goes behind the yellow one that there's the major dip in brightness, and you can see that, and it goes down from 2nd magnitude to 3rd magnitude, and that happens every 2.87 days. So it's called an eclipsing binary, and the 2 stars are going around their common centre of mass. Not really a true variable star in the sense, but interesting. And of course, once you come down through Perseus to the northeast horizon, the Milky Way then is going away. And that's really from Cepheus through Cassiopeia through Perseus. That's the arc of the Milky Way going down to the northeast.
Of course, one thing, you do need a dark sky to see the Milky Way properly. For living in a city, you're not going to see it.
That's quite right.
So there's plenty up there. Well, John, now time, I think, to kill our lights and turn on to our infrared and see how Chris is getting on.
Well, it's early evening, it's a beautiful clear night, and Pete, you've already seen one event of the evening, the passage of the International Space Station.
That's right. We got a view of it from the garden here, but I decided to try and get the early part of the track. And so to do that, I had to go down to the beach where there's a very flat horizon, of course. And it was actually quite an impressive pass this time, but very short and ended quite low. But what was interesting is that at the end, as it just went above Jupiter, it went into the Earth's shadow, and from the beach where it's slightly darker than here, I could actually see it as a tiny dot still going through the Earth's shadow.
So is that reflected light or light from the station
I think
itself?
it's just, yeah, it's like if you have a lunar eclipse, you've just got that little reddish glow there, and it was picking it up, and you can actually see it in this photograph here.
Oh yes, there you go, it's obvious, and then, oh, the track continues. That's rather fun.
But what was exciting, again, was the fact that there was also the Jules Verne module, which is now detached from the space shuttle.
It's the European transfer vehicle.
It is. That was also visible a bit later on. About
following in roughly the same track.
No, it wasn't the same track at all.
Oh, okay.
It was a different track. That was very faint. I couldn't see that with the naked eye, but the camera just picked it up.
Well, this is an unusual view of an unusual object. What are you looking at?
This is the Pac-Man Nebula, or NGC 281.
I think I prefer the Pac-Man.
Yeah.
Wow, look at that.
I mean, I've spent a lot of time imaging M33 because it's very, very faint. To the naked eye, you need an exceptional dark sight to even really see it.
Look at this. Look at the detail of this. You've got the spiral arms being picked out by young star clusters, the blue things, and
got these bright hydrogen alpha.
So these pink regions, they're very young stars,
yes,
I guess.
Bright active star forming regions.
Well, it's nice to see our neighbours so well.
Yes, it is. It is. Thank you.
I finally managed to image M39, that cluster that I've been looking at, and I think I got a quite good image.
So why were you after M39 in particular?
It's just a really enigmatic cluster. It's really nice through the telescope. It's particularly a rich, wide field refractor, the one that I was using. It just sits out sparkling against the Milky Way, and it looks really, really nice through the telescope.
Well, if I'm looking north, we now look south. And we still see the summer triangle, Vega, Deneb, Altair, but it's very definitely past its best.
It is. It's now moving over into the southwestern sky, but I suppose for anybody coming out on a clear evening, early on, Deneb more or less overhead, Vega rather brighter to the west, and of course Altair, the southernmost of the three, with the two little stars on either side. And of course the Milky Way runs right the way overhead, down through the summer triangle, past Deneb, below Vega, and down into the southwestern sky. So the summer triangle is, as you say, past its best, but you're going to still see it for some time to come.
Although only Altair actually sets on it.
That's right.
And now come on to the main autumn constellation, which is Pegasus. In mythology, Pegasus was a flying horse. In the sky, he's a square.
He is, and of course, the four stars of the square, in a lot of maps, you think the square is smaller and the stars are brighter than it really is.
Yes, exactly.
Actually, the square is quite large and the stars are sort of second, third magnitude, but it is the main autumn constellation. Although, of course, you do have a main outlier to the square, and that's the star Enif, which is some way to the west of the square and about the same brightness as the four stars in the square. Now, of course, the square itself is of interest, but top right, we have a very interesting orange variable star.
Beta Pegasi, or SCAT, and that really is a genuine variable, not a fake like Algol. It really is variable.
Yes, it's a giant star. It's an orange giant star, about 90 times as luminous as the sun, low surface temperature, and it's slowly pulsating. And as it pulsates, it varies in brightness from about mag 2.3 to about 2.8, and I make it reasonably faint this evening.
There's one lovely globular cluster in Pegasus too.
Yes, that's M15. Now, if you go to the star Enif and you come above and to the right of it, there is M15. Now, let's just remind ourselves what globulars are. They are, of course, spherical associations of very old stars, between 100,000 and 1 million stars per cluster, some of the oldest stars in the Milky Way. But they're actually, the globular clusters form a halo all around our galaxy, and M15 is a fine example. Now, we also have a lot of very interesting galaxies in and around the square. If you go to the top right of the square, Beta Pegasi, there's a triangle of stars, Beta, Eta, and Mu. And just above that little triangle, there is a group of galaxies, the NGC 7331 group. Three main galaxies there.
There are other interesting things around there too.
Yes, just below that little group of galaxies is Stephan's Quintet.
Yes.
Now, this is very interesting because, as the name Quintet will say, there are 5 galaxies as part of this group. But it seems, when you look at the redshifts, 4 of them have near identical redshifts and are at great distance. The other one, which appears to be a member of the quintet, has a much lower redshift and is therefore a foreground object. So when you look at it and you see those 5 galaxies appearing as a group, one of them is nearer than the other 4.
Now come back to things we can see with the naked eye, and 2 more stars we can identify from the squares of Pegasus. First of all, let's take the 2 right-hand stars in front of a line down, much further, almost to the horizon, and there you come to Fomalhaut in the southern fish, the southernmost first magnitude star ever seen from here.
And of course Selsey is an ideal place to see it because you've got a sea horizon, you're looking to the south, and Fomalhaut is quite easy to see but very low down. And in fact, of course, Fomalhaut itself is an interesting star because it's been found that it has a debris disk around it, which is indicative that a planetary system is forming there, and this disk has a ring associated, probably with a massive Neptune mass planet that's cleared a lot of the debris away, leaving the ring further out. So again, a fascinating object low down in the southern sky.
Also one of our nearer neighbours in space, and I wonder, are there planets there? Is anyone there looking at us? I wonder.
I think it's far too young a planetary system to have any planets with life on, but maybe in the far, far future.
I wonder.
We had some beautiful views of deep sky objects in the first half of the night. I had a particularly good view of a gorgeous globular cluster, M15. But now, with the moon rising, it's time for all the telescopes to point towards our nearest neighbour. Well, John, we were last here for the lunar eclipse in April. How was your summer? Did you get much observing in?
Well, it's been a bit grim, hasn't it, with the weather and what have you, although at crucial moments when we really needed it to be clear, such as at the lunar eclipse at about 3 in the morning, there was quite a nice...
That was a good night.
Slightly hazy, but good enough to see it.
And we had the solar eclipse as well.
Yes, now there was a glimpse there. So at these crucial moments when we needed some form of visibility, that the rain and the clouds abated. But for most of the time it's been a bit overcast and a little bit miserable, not what we'd want.
But here we are.
This is a great one.
Yeah, this is nice.
You never get bored of the moon, do you? It always offers something different. There's always something different to look at. All the different phases that show you different areas of the moon.
And you're a man after my own heart. You're a low-tech observer. It's go out with binoculars and enjoy the sky, right?
Yes, I just sort of enjoy the majesty of it rather than doing too many measurements. If I want to know about measurements, I'll ask you.
Yes, all the wonderful images these guys around us produce as well.
But tonight... Sir Patrick has done it again. He must have ordered the weather. It doesn't seem as though there's going to be any clouds or interference or anything today at all. This is looking very, very good, boding extremely well.
Well, Pete, we've got the moon perfectly positioned now, and you're looking at one particular region. Why here, and actually, what on earth are you looking at?
It's a feature which I find quite enigmatic, actually. It's an amazing thing. It's called Rayner Gamma, and it's a bright albedo. It's a bright reflective feature on the moon. But the thing which is really interesting is how it formed, because what's believed is that there is a very strong magnetic field around this region of the moon. And one rather exotic theory, which I rather like, is that something slammed into the back of the moon, sent a shockwave through the moon and puffed up the material, which then settled down and was guided by the magnetic fields. And you can see there is a central region which looks a bit like an eye, and then there are these tendrils that sort of go out in each direction. It's rather lovely.
Well, you spent the whole evening looking at one object, so what is it and what on earth is on the screen?
This is a wide-angle, wide-field crescent nebula taken with the hyperstar. It's been taken with a hydrogen alpha filter, which allows me to cut through the moon globe.
So how long an exposure has this been to get to this stage?
These are 5-minute images, but I've been doing this for about 4.5 hours so far.
And you'll have plenty of work to do on it when you get home to turn those 5 hours of work into something.
Yeah, I'll leave them stacking, get some food, say hello to the wife, and then start processing, and she'll be really happy.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the final image at least.
Thank you.
Nearly midnight now, still clear, the moon is rising, back to our awesome sky, the area of Pegasus. What about Aquarius, the water bearer?
Yeah, now Aquarius is a fairly faint pattern below and to the right of the square of Pegasus. Alpha and Beta Aquarii form a line going out from the diagonal of the square extended, and there are quite a few interesting objects in and around the Aquarius region.
Zeta's a nice double.
Zeta's a nice double, and of course you've got the Saturn Nebula, NGC 7009. Now the Saturn Nebula, of course, was given that name by the 3rd Earl of Ross in the 1840s. Through a large telescope, it does resemble Saturn with the rings almost edge-on. Through a small telescope, it's really like a rather fuzzy egg shape.
We've got no bright planets in Aquarius. We do have one planet there, and that is Uranus.
Yes, now Uranus, of course, is at the threshold of naked eye visibility, about Mag 5.7. And the way I find it at the moment is, if you go below the square of Pegasus, there's part of Pisces the Fishes, a group of stars known as the Circlet, which makes a sort of an irregular polygon shape directly below the square. The stars are quite faint, about 4th magnitude, but if you take the bottom star of the Circlet, if you come down from there onto the ecliptic, where the ecliptic is, that is where Uranus is at the moment, and of course it is at the threshold of naked eye visibility.
I think with binoculars you can see it's not a star. It does show a small disk, and of course with the telescope that disk is obvious. And with my 15-inch, I can see the 4 main moons, Ariel, Umbral, Titania, Oberon.
Yes, it is worth looking for.
This is my kind of astronomy, just enjoying a view of the moon. We don't always see the same parts of it though. As it orbits the Earth, it wobbles. And tonight, the South Pole is turned towards us. It's an effect called libration. Well, Damien, it's 3 in the morning. How are we doing? You wanted to see the South Pole of the moon?
Yes, it's going well so far. At the moment, I'm looking at a crater that we rarely ever see, called Drygalski, and this crater is quite close to the South Polar area, and it's only ever visible during good southern librations, which we have tonight. And it's actually quite a large crater at nearly 170 kilometres, and if it were actually further onto the near side, it would be a very, very prominent crater.
I was out looking at M57.
The Ring Nebula.
The Ring Nebula, and it was actually great structure. You could see the central star. Then we turned the telescope onto M27.
The Dumbbell.
The Dumbbell Nebula, and it was really good.
I had a look at that earlier through one of the other scopes.
Yeah, so that was amazing detail on that. And then when the moon rose, we were able to look at viewed craters and at 439 times magnification.
Oh wow, like you're standing on the surface, well, above the surface, I guess.
Yeah, so it was quite exciting.
What about you? What were your highlights from the evening?
Well, Chris, I'm a bit of a galaxy fan, so some of the objects featured on the programme this evening was one of Stephan's Quintet.
Oh wow,
and I've
you managed to see Stephan's Quintet?
Only for the second time in my life I've seen Stephan's Quintet. In particular, we were able to clearly pick out NGC 7320, which is a bit unusual because some people believe that it's not actually associated with this group of 5 galaxies.
But yet you saw all 5
But I could see
there.
all 5 simultaneously, and also saw NGC 7331, which is the Deerlick galaxy. It's a much brighter galaxy, so it was far easier to see in the telescope, plus a couple of the fainter galaxies surrounding it. So it was very impressive and very enjoyable evening
so
indeed.
We've had a mixture of everything, from the moon to nebulae to galaxies.
It was all great fun.
Well, Rob, you were going to look at Uranus. How did you get on?
Well, I'm very pleased, really. Found Uranus earlier on, and I managed to produce a spectrum from it.
And there we are.
And there we are, yeah. We can see the continuous solar spectrum.
That's just reflecting the sun's light.
Reflected light, that's right, yeah.
And so if we can identify them, they tell us what Uranus is made of, essentially, or the atmosphere
right,
is.
yeah.
So can we identify them?
That's right, somebody's done it for me, and in fact it's methane in the atmosphere.
But you've done some imaging as well,
Well,
John.
yes, indeed.
Lower tech, perhaps.
If you just happen to position your camera phone in just the right place through the telescope eyepiece, you can record some quite nice images.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. For a camera phone, that's not too bad at all.
Back to the square of Pegasus. Remember, the top left-hand star had been given a free transfer to Andromeda. Andromeda itself, a line of farther bright stars leading away from the square. And the third of these, Gamma Andromedae or Almar, is a nice double.
It is. And of course, the line of stars in Andromeda actually extends from the top left of the square and points almost directly towards Murphach, the brightest star in Perseus, which we mentioned earlier when we were looking towards the northeast. Now, there are a number of interesting objects in Andromeda. There's an interesting planetary nebula, NGC 7662. Above the centre of the square of Pegasus, there's a triangle of stars, Kappa, Iota and Omicron Andromedae, and towards the bottom of that triangle, in the bottom side of it, that's where you'll find this planetary nebula. It's small, but it is surprisingly bright and surprisingly easy to find. And there are, of course, a number of interesting galaxies, and one of my favourites, which is quite close to Gamma Andromedae, which is the star you mentioned just now, is NGC 891.
Almost edge on.
Yes, it's almost edge on, and it has a very dusty lane extending right along the plane of the galaxy. But of course, I suppose, the highlight of them all, M31, the great galaxy in Andromeda.
Unfortunately, at a rather unfavourable angle to us, and the full beauty of the spiral is lost. But there it is. You see it with the naked eye, binoculars, it's easy. In the telescope, I think a bit disappointing, you know.
I have to say, I think the view through a pair of binoculars like this is infinitely better than in a low-power view in a small telescope.
But there is one spiral here, in that area, that is. That's M33 in Triangulum.
Yes, now Triangulum is a fairly faint pattern, in the shape of a triangle, of course, and if you find Gamma and Beta Andromedae, and you make an equilateral triangle coming down from those two stars, you eventually find these three stars of Triangulum, and Alpha Trianguli is the star marking the apex of the triangle. And if you come above and to the right of that star, there you'll find M33. Now, under incredibly good dark skies, it is just at the threshold of naked eye visibility. I've only ever glimpsed it once with the naked eye, and that was in very dark conditions. But as you say, in binoculars, it is a nice face-on spiral. So we have, in a way, at this time of year, the three brightest local group galaxies. We've got the Milky Way arching right across the sky. We've got M31 in Andromeda, and we've got M33, the Triangulum spiral.
So we've looked around the sky, north, south, east, west. There's plenty to see there. John, thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick.
Well, there's interesting news about the solar system, and Chris Lintott has the details.
The Hubble Space Telescope is in trouble. Just a few days ago, the main control system shut down, leaving Hubble floating helplessly in space. Astronauts had been due to visit the telescope in mid-October, but this has now been delayed until next year. The extra time is needed to prepare a plan and to get the astronauts prepared for what was already the most complex space shuttle mission ever attempted. More cheerfully, we now know it snows on Mars. The discovery was made by the Phoenix lander, continuing its experiments in the Martian Arctic Circle. Amongst these wintry clouds, Phoenix has discovered snowflakes. Earlier, we were looking at the Jules Verne spacecraft, which had been visiting the International Space Station. It's since deliberately been burnt up in the Earth's atmosphere, providing this spectacular show.
Don't forget, it's newsletter time. If you want your newsletter, send your stamped addressed envelope to newsletter number 111, the mailbox, BBC, Birmingham, B1 1RF. So, next month, Chris will be going to Arizona to get the latest news from the Phoenix probe, and I'll be here talking about the biggest explosions in the universe. So until then, from my gardener Selsey, good night.